Hi, welcome back to the channel. This week it's everyone's favorite topic, and that is bass lines. And no surprises, but I'm in Serum once again. And to be honest, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And Serum 2 did introduce quite a few new changes that really take your bass lines to a whole nother level. But there are also a couple gotchas and things that you need to pay attention to. Otherwise, they'll sound quite terrible. So without any further ado, let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is obviously draw in our bass notes. Let's put it on F, duplicate that, and we'll turn down the first one. Doesn't really matter because I'll show you how to adjust that in the patch itself anyway. And then we're going to shorten these notes just a bit. Basically, I go by I around there. Let's turn it down an octave. Let's go to F1, and then we'll duplicate that out. So now we have this, which will quite clearly sound horrible. The first thing to do is add velocity to the level here. Now, I mentioned a few moments ago that it doesn't really matter where we put the first bass note level, because I said I'm going to adjust it in the patch, and this is where you do it. So basically the depth here is basically overriding the gap in the high note to the low note, if that makes sense. So by reducing this, then you're reducing the variation between the loud and the high. So there's quite a big gap, or obviously quite low, and then you turn it up here. So we'll come back to that. We need to turn down the random because we never want that on a bass. And then we'll go into our wavetables here and S2 tables. I quite like for this Saw Alice. We can play with the phase here. Let's leave it at 180 for now. And the next thing we need to do is go into our filter. And here, once again, let's choose the new filter types. And I quite like MG Dirty. Ensure that oscillator A is being routed into filter 1, and it is here. Then we'll go to envelope 2 and attach that to cutoff, unipolar. I know it's the key command to do it, but I like showing you. Turn that down. And we have the beginnings of a bass. On envelope 2, let's change this to BPM. Then we can adjust the ADSR based on the BPM rather than milliseconds. But more importantly than that, if we right click here and do grid beats, we can now see where this lines up. So this prominent vertical line here, that is obviously on the bar. Then these lighter vertical lines are the quarters. And then obviously the ones in the middle are the 16ths. So let's zoom in. I'm going to go like so, change this to 116, zoom in further again, and we can see basically that's where our bass note is ending. So let's go back and fine tune the cutoff now. Then on envelope 1, once again, ensure that it's on beats, and it is. Let's just zoom in a little bit there, and then change this to BPM. Bring that down to 1/16th and drop the sustain just a little bit. We still want it to be quite high to give the energy, but we also want a bit of attack there. Or decay, I should say. What I'm saying is a little bit of a transient. And once again, pay attention to this vertical line because this is our 16th. So we essentially don't want it to go over because that's where the next bass note is coming in. So anything over is going to interrupt that. And now we get into some of the fun stuff. So if we go to our effects section, this is my default preset, which automatically has an EQ cutting out the lows, which is obviously irrelevant for this patch. So let's delete that. And instead, let's add a filter. And for here, we're going to use one of the new filters, the diffuser. And the diffuser is essentially a disperser. So let's now add a oscillos, or any oscilloscope for that matter. Let's just look at the bass for now. Let's turn this off or bypass it for now. I have a listen to what we have. And with the kick. So that's sounding okay, but we can definitely beef it up a bit by using the diffuser. And essentially what we're going to be doing is rotating the phase. And the key parameters here are the stages, the cutoff, and the resonance. So let's play with those until we get something that we start to like. And what you can see, basically, it's pushing the energy back in the cycle. while at the same time increasing the average loudness for each bass note. So if we turn it off, you can see we just get the typical saw here, but by turning it on, this is more pronounced. And really, this is basically just to taste, to be honest. So I think that is working. Now, one thing you might have already noticed is that once we added the disperser, look at what happens with the start of the bass note here. You can see we have the vertical line coming down here, which should be the start of the bass note. And in fact, let's put the kick on. Let's turn that on. And I'll put this to, let's go 2/4. And we'll change this to green just because. You can say that I don't have any latency issues because the kick lines up perfectly. However, the bass is basically shifted back a little bit. It should be starting here, but it's been shifted back when we turn the diffuser on. So let's turn this off, and then you'll see the bass note come back and it will sit here. Exactly where I said, basically there. Turn it on and it will shift out again. There we go. That is because the diffuser is pushing the wave back in time. And some of you know that I use Ableton Live also, and it's very well known that that does have some latency issues, and they never really bothered me because I knew that where things should line up. But this is the first time where using this in Ableton would really become an issue, because you might just attribute this to just normal latency issues. But in fact, because Cubase doesn't have those issues, you can quite clearly see that the issue is not in the DAW, but in Serum. And I use issue in inverted commas because the diffuser is doing exactly what it should. This is essentially just an unintended side effect, basically. But we're going to remedy that in a moment. Let's now add a splitter low, mid, high, and we're going to put that before the filter. So let's drag that down. And here, let's add a distortion to the highs. So essentially what we're going to do is exciting the high frequencies, but leaving the low and mids intact. Turn it off. Just a subtle difference. We don't want too much because we like the overall character of the bass. We just want to just basically bring those highs up and make them more prominent in the mix. Let's change this back to 1/4. Now once we've got the bass sounding the way we like it, let's just check the wavetable phase. Yeah, it definitely sounds best at 180, so let's keep it there. So now that we've got the bassline sounding the way we want it, and this is definitely not a new Serum trick, we can go to here, click on this little out, and then we can drag that to our project. And you'd be surprised how many people didn't know about this little sample export. And then in your DAW, let's zoom in. Obviously this is specific to an individual DAW. We can see here, basically this is the delay. We want to chop that off and move it across like so. Bring this back in. Essentially now we're just resampling the bass. Just take off the tail so it ends perfectly before the next one. So now we have the kick and the rendered bass. Sounds like this. Let's just turn down the volume there. Or the original one. However, the issue with doing that, and for those of you are paying extra special attention, by doing that, I haven't taken into consideration the drop-in velocity for the first bass note. So it's more machine gun-like than it previously was. We could obviously fix that by dropping the amplitude here, like so. But a far better approach is in your DAW itself, and once again, your method will differ. You go in the delay here, and then you drop this back a little bit so that it lines up. So let's play this back, and we'll watch where the bass note hits. Currently it's there, you can see this little vertical line here, and we'll drop this back. You can see it's gradually coming back. There we go, about there. So that's sounding perfect. Let's now layer these. And then we'll go back into our effects here, and in our splitter, let's play with this low frequency. This is essentially where it divides the low and the mids. So now anything below 210 is considered a low frequency, and anything above is considered a mid frequency, but obviously we can change that like so. But what's going to happen is, when we change this split, it's going to move the phase so that we're in line with the kick. So there, I think that sounds about right. You can obviously change it, move it higher, but then it sounds horrible. It sounds kind of woody. There we go, that's kind of where I like it. And one final thing, let's add a EQ. And it's quite common for frequencies around the 300 mark to really sound quite unpleasant in a bass line. So let's notch them out a little bit. So let's change this to a bell. And then drop it out. I think that sounds quite nice. So there we are, bass lines in Serum. And Serum once again working its magic. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.